make our buttermilk biscuits, we want to go ahead and combine all of our dry ingredients together. So I have my 2 flours, my sugar, my salt, and my baking powder. And we want to mix that up really well along with our butter. So the butter should be nice and cold and cut into cubes and then tossed in the dry mixture so that it really incorporates and dusts each piece to keep it separated. So what I want to do now is go ahead and kind of push on each piece of butter and smear it apart with my thumbs and my fingers, and then reincorporate that back into the flour, and so that it will absorb some of the moisture from the butter. Give it to basically a coarse meal is what we're looking for. That should be the final consistency before we add all of our mix-ins and our liquid ingredients. So I'm going to continue to mix this, working quickly, but making sure that all of my butter pieces are worked out of there. So I shouldn't feel any large chunks like this. So I'm going to continue to do this, and you'll see what the final product will look like. The mixture now looks like coarse meal, and it's taken on a little bit more of a yellow hue, and it's a lot moister looking. Kind of looks like a little bit like a damp sand. And so when this is prepared here, we want to go over to our liquid ingredients, which is buttermilk and our egg. So I'm going to go ahead and place my 1 egg into the buttermilk and beat that up really well, so it's really well dispersed. So when it goes into here, we don't just have the separated yolk and the white. Okay, and then in addition to this, we have whatever mix-ins you want, if you want any. You can do this plain, but I really like the idea of putting cheese and herbs. So I have cheddar cheese and I have my chives that I'm gonna toss in before I put my liquid ingredients in there, so it is really well distributed and the cheddar does not clump up because now it's kind of coated with the flour. So the last step, which is quite messy, is adding the liquid ingredients to the dry. And then what we want to do is prepare our cutting board for going ahead and turning it out onto that immediately. We're going to add some of our flour. So that's prepared. So the first step here is to go ahead and pour this in. Make sure you get all of that liquid out. It's absolutely necessary for the right consistency of your dough. And then what we want to do is just get one hand in there and turn it around. I know you're gonna wanna use a utensil, but your hand is the best utensil for this method because you can really feel where it's wet and where it's dry. And we don't wanna mix this too much. We just wanna kind of push it down, lift it up off that bottom, push it down with a flat hand to really just push all those dry ingredients into the wet and not overwork the dough. What we don't wanna do is develop that gluten too much. We want it to be nice and tender. But we do want none of that dry space in there. So keep kind of folding it over itself a little bit, just until it looks like it's come together, which it looks like it has. You can try and scrape off as much of that from your finger as possible. And then we're going to turn this out onto the floured cutting board. You can see why it's easier to have that floured surface already done before you get to this point, so you don't stick your dirty hands into the flour bin. Okay, so now you can take a little bit of flour on your hands here, and you want to push this into a rectangular shape. Again, trying not to overwork the dough. I'm just using the flat part of my hand to do this. I don't really need a rolling pin, to be completely honest. I like to use my hands to feel where the dough is. And then what I want to do is fold this and pretty much laminate it. So I'm gonna fold this in thirds. We're gonna do it 2 times. So a nice rectangle, fold 1/3 over itself, and then the other third over that. It's kind of rough in the beginning, and that's totally fine. Then we're gonna flatten that out again. And again, you can use a rolling pin for this if you feel more comfortable. I'm also making sure I'm not stuck to the bottom. So I had the perfect amount of dusting flour on my surface without adding too much flour to dry out our dough. Spread this out into a rectangle one more time, and you're going to give it another what we call single turn. So we're going to complete that turn in thirds by putting 1/3 over itself. You can see it's a little bit more come together, less shaggy this time. The other third over itself, and now we're ready to roll it out in order to cut it. The first thing you want to do is dust your surface one more time very lightly and place that dough right on top. I'm going to leave it this direction, and then I am going to kind of pat it down a little bit to keep the evenness of the dough, and then I can roll it slightly. If it starts to stick to your rolling pin, just go ahead and add a little bit more flour to that as well. I like to shape with the sides of my hands, making sure that all of my edges are straight. Now, if you are cutting squares, and this is extremely important, if you're using a cookie cutter and cutting rounds, then that's not as critical. But what you are gonna find is when you do cut with rounds, you are going to get some waste. So if you're okay with that, the key to getting the least amount of waste is making sure that you're going right next to itself each time you cut. I'm going to do a couple rounds so you can see how that's done, and then go ahead and cut with a knife so you can see how you can accomplish this with no waste. And if I'm interested in using my round cookie cutter, I want to dust it in a bin of flour and then go right to an edge and cut straight down very quickly, turn it just slightly, and then lift this out. What I do not want to do is squeeze these edges together. So you can see this cut nicely, and it left me a really kind of open side area, and that's what's going to allow it to puff up. So please keep in mind that any size that you do, you want to make sure that the same size is on the same pan. And if you are doing anything that is larger or smaller, you want to consider the time that it will be in the oven. So for instance, I would normally do all of them the same size, but because I want to show you how to have no waste, let's say we started with this, then we are going to cut we're going to do some mini ones. So I'm going to mark it first. I always like to just trim the edges if I want that professional look. We'll save those scraps for putting together a scrap piece that won't look as pretty, but it will definitely taste just as good. And on this one here, I think we will go and do the third. So I can get 9 small pieces out of this. Always mark first and then cut. So I'm gonna cut very quickly straight down to get a nice clean edge, and then turn my rectangle, keep it nice and squared up, cut and cut. And now with this situation here, I have absolutely no waste. I'm going to place that on its own pan to bake. Now with this, cutting the rounds, we do get some waste. So what you want to do is you want to kind of squeeze them back together. Try not to knead them together, but you can squeeze back together, cut very quickly. You'll have another round there. And with this last piece, we can do that as well to maintain as much usage of the product as possible. Kind of push that in there to flatten it out slightly, and then all we have is this right here. So that is your way to obtain 100% usage, but you will see at the end, these will not look as nice as the first 2 that I cut. So we're going to place these on a pan and brush them with a little egg wash. So our final step before this goes into the oven is taking a little bit of egg wash and making sure it remains only on the top of the biscuit. You do not want it running over the edge, because what will happen is it will seal those edges together, therefore they will not puff nice and tall. So we want to maintain that nice texture and allow it to rise up. So just remain on the top with your brush and just put very little egg wash right on top. So these are going to go right into the oven, about 400, 425, depending on your oven. And they will take anywhere from 12 to 18 minutes. Again, everyone's oven is a little different, so what we're looking for is that nice light golden brown.